So we have
Sounds good.
today Grumpus Maximus, who is the pension guru. He is former military, retired military, and he has really gone through a lot to figure out the ins and outs of pensions. And he has graciously agreed to meet with us today and talk to us and let us know a little bit about how to look at our pensions, how to look at retirement, kind of how to start thinking about all of these things. Would you give us a little bit of your backstory?
So, yeah, I'm Grumpus Maximus. Obviously, that's not my real name. I use a pseudonym as part of my blogging and writing goes. I just retired in January of this year from 20 years in the U.S. military. Um, in 2016, I had a mental breakdown and was diagnosed with PTS. And at that point in my career, I didn't know if I was going to be able to carry on. And I think I was at 17 years in the military at that point, and I knew I had this pension waiting for me at 20 years. But as I said, I really didn't know if I could carry on. So I had the dubious experience of having to navigate military healthcare mental health system, and also trying to figure out how much money I would be leaving on the table if I decided to leave from my military job, from my pensionable job. So I had to teach myself how to do all the valuations and account for all the different variables within my pension, as well as trying to navigate mental health care at the same time, which, as an experience goes, I wouldn't recommend it to anybody. Both of those things can be very, very hard and very taxing, but both of them together were even worse. So um, I decided to stay in the end. Um, when I did all the calculations and saw the millions of dollars in potential pension payments I would receive over the rest of my lifetime, as well as the health care attached to it, just from a monetary perspective, there was no way that I could get out of the military after 17 years and go and get a job for 3 years and earn a pension of the type that the military was going to give me. So, as I knew I was potentially risking more mental health damage and more mental health issues. But for the good of my family, I have two young kids and a wife, decided to stay. So that's a situation we call gutting it out when you decide to stay. The situation I found myself in, I ultimately started calling the Golden Albatross, which is hence the name of both the blog and the book. And that really refers to someone in a pensionable career at whatever point in their pensionable career, waking up one day and deciding, hey, maybe I can't do this. Maybe this pension isn't worth it. And then, how to figure out those types of issues from that point forward. So that's my backstory.
Well, I gotta say, I've seen you first on the Choose FI Facebook group, and then I heard you. I went back and I listened to podcasts that you were on. I think were you on there twice?
Yeah, I've been on now 3 times.
3 times. I heard at least two of them, and I just was like floored because pensions has always been like they've been out there for me. I know that it's going to be out there in the future. I'm hoping it'll be out there in the future, but I never really took time to understand it, and that's kind of what my project was over this pandemic, is to start to look into how to even grasp what it means, how to get there. What if I want to retire a little early? What is that going to mean for my pension? So when I saw your name and I heard your podcast, I just was ecstatic that someone has already done it, and I didn't need to reinvent the wheel. I just needed to pick up your book, which I did, and it's fantastic. So those of you who've been here the last couple days know I've been raffling off a book a day. So Grumpus's book today will be raffled off. And I'll be honest, I'm about halfway through it, but I've been loving the personal stories you put in there. Really lifted up, because I was worried that a whole book on pensions could be pretty dry, but it is not. It's really entertaining, and the fact that you are so open about your mental health struggles makes you so relatable, and I appreciate your willingness to do that. I'm gonna switch a little bit and ask you, Grumpus Maximus, why? Why did you name
Uh,
yourself Grumpus Maximus? Where did that come from?
so actually, my wife and my younger brother gave me that name, and here I'll even prove it to you. They got me a coffee mug as well. Um, so I was on deployment. I think I was going through a stretch of being on deployment about 18 months out of 2 years when back between 2007 and 2009. After one of those deployments, I can't remember which, I came home, and my brother, who's also in the military, and my wife, we were all roommates at that time. Um, I came back and they had just dubbed me Grumpus Maximus, probably because like the tone of all my emails and all my phone calls was just like, oh, this is hard, everything's awful, which is kind of my personality. So yeah, I came home and I had been appointed Grumpus Maximus. And then it just became like the obvious pseudonym to use when I decided I was going to start a blog. Um, in part because it allows me to be open and honest about things like mental health.
Awesome, great idea. Um, I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen real quick so people can see your blog and they can know where where to go because you have so much great information on there. Hold on. So when did you start the blog?
Started in 2017, summer or June of 2017. Now
Okay.
that I live in, I'm sorry, go.
No, I was just going to ask how did you get started with that? Were you just looking for a place to vent? Did you hook up with people on was it through Choose FI where they wanted to get help you get going with that?
No, it was on my own. I have a friend who found herself in a very similar situation that I found myself in 2016. So in early 2017, I was helping her through all the same calculations, and she was navigating many of the same mental health issues. And you know, at the end of it, she said, "Hey, you know, you really helped me. You have a lot of great information. You should start a blog." And so I did. In the meantime, I was at my final command at that point, and I'd been sending out emails every so often to the command about finance and other things about personal finance and, you know, how to improve your finances and stuff. And I just took some of those emails and made them into blog posts really quick and kind of got started that way. And it just took off from there.
Okay, so you guys can see here grumpusmaximus.com. Pretty straightforward. He's got a
Yeah.
lot of good information. Oh, I did want to go over. Can you tell us a little bit about the story and how you came to the name of your book?
Yeah. So the golden albatross, as I referred to, is the name of the situation I found myself in, and that many pensioners find themselves in about when, at whatever point in their career, they start questioning whether or not they can stay and make it to their pension. And again, I wanted a way to value my pension against some of the other kind of, I wanted hard values of my pension versus some of the subjective, more subjective things I was going through with my mental health issues. And so in many ways, it kind of felt like this albatross had been hung around my neck as far as the pension goes. So after I was done helping my friend and starting the blog, we were throwing about, up until that point, we had been throwing around the term golden handcuffs because that's the typical name that, yeah, the name of the situation you find yourself in when you're at a job that has some kind of compensation at the end that is making you stay, even though you don't necessarily want to. And but as I started my blog, I looked up the definition of golden handcuffs, and really that definition refers to executives. It's more about you know, delayed benefits that executives get from a corporation or something like that. And I wanted something more for, you know, to speak to our situation of more common people because, you know, we weren't executives. And so I was kind of going around trying to come up with a metaphor. And then I remember one of the exchanges in one of my favorite movies. I'm a sci-fi nerd, so Serenity. There's this exchange about the girl that the good guy is helping. The bad guy says she's gonna hang around your neck like an albatross. And the good guy responds, as far as I remember, the albatross was good luck until someone stupid shot him. So I had that kind of albatross metaphor already going around from my experience with valuing my pension and decided to stay and gut it out. as well as this idea that you had golden something like golden handcuffs. So I just combined those two metaphors. So the next kind of story down from that in my Google search was one about the Rembrandts, the band who wrote the song for Friends, the television show, and how that song had become a golden albatross. And so I had seen that now that term had been used before, but I decided to appropriate it for myself and apply it to the situation. And as far as I know, now if you type in golden albatross into Google, up should pop my blog and stuff like that instead of hopefully the Urban Dictionary definition.
You saved us all. All right, great. Well, you have a lot of interesting like mystery around both your blog title, the name that you go by, your book title. So it's nice to kind of get in and understand that. I did send out a survey. I told you a little bit about that to a lot of the speech language pathologists here. And we got a lot of good questions back. I'm going to start with some of the ones that were very repetitive because obviously we have a lot of the same concerns. I think first and foremost, how do I know if I can count on my pension? How do I know if it's going to be there? How do I know the state of my personal pension?
Yeah, so pension safety is the number one issue that pensioners cite when they decide not to take the annuity but take the lump sum instead. So that is a topic on pretty much almost every pensioner's mind at some point. So there's multiple ways you can do this. I personally think the easiest way is something that the American Association of Actuaries recommends, is that you get out several years of your pension statements, where you go online and research the last few years of your pension system reporting their financial numbers, and you're looking for a funding ratio number that's always going to be in that paperwork or in that online information that you find. And a lot of people get obsessed with just the one number for the most recent year. But really what the American Association of Actuaries recommends is that you look at the trend of funding over the past 5-ish years and see where that trend level is going. So the funding ratio is basically what that refers to is how much assets a pension fund has on hand to pay both the current retirees, so the people already receiving annuities, and all the future obligations they've made over the next 30 years. So it gets subjective rather quickly, but it is a hard number that is reported in most reports. And a lot of people get obsessed with about the 80% funding level. That has become this mythical funding level that American pensions tend to claim. If you're above that, you're in good financial health. If you're below that, then you're in less good financial health, and you could even be in bad financial health. The American Association of Actuaries points out, hey, that 80%, we don't know where that came from, but that doesn't really mean anything. What means more is what the trend lines is. For any pension system that doesn't have a funding ratio of 100% or more, you're potentially in danger. But again, the trend lines on whether or not that funding level is going down, or that funding level is going up, or that funding level is just kind of staying the same, which most have done over the last 10 years, that trend is far more important. But then they say, hey, you need to take that trend and combine it with several other things, kind of like information about how many contributions are coming in each year versus how much money is going out. What the number of working people within the pension system, so people who haven't started receiving their pension yet but are making contributions or are working towards it, versus the number of people who are already receiving money. So, in this in the preparatory PowerPoint slides that I sent out for this, and I'm sure
they should be in the chat too. So if you guys want to open up the slides that he did provide us, they are in the chat. I can also open them.
Yeah, I kind of walk you through, the American Association of Actuaries recommendations for funding. So, again, funding is very important. Funding percentage is very important, but don't get stuck on one number is the takeaway. And again, you can find, you should be getting mail from your pension fund annually, kind of declaring all this, because these are mandatory requirements they have to make to the U.S. government. But if you don't, then a great place to go is the Boston College's Center for Retirement Research, and they collect information on all the major state pension funds, so public pension funds,
Okay.
as well as some of the major counties and cities. But overall, there are over 5,000 state, county, and city pension funds in the U.S. So that's a lot to keep track of. They only keep track of the largest ones.
Can you
If
tell
you
us that
can't,
resource again? Boston College.
Center for Retirement Research.
Okay.
So they have a public plans database. That's what you're looking for, the PPD.
Okay.
And they have a really great user interface. Here, I think I brought it up. Let me escape out. Maybe I can share my screen in a
Yeah.
second. Hang on.
Let me.
Can you guys see it?
Yes.
Okay, so here I am at publicplansdata.org, right up here in the search bar. And you go to interactive data, and you can view it this way. So you just type in your fund, or if you're looking for a specific year, you can browse the data or you can download it. But actually, there's an even easier way to get to this. Let me see if.
It's always what happens with technology. We're good.
Yeah, here we go.
Okay.
So you can get down to state by state, and this is kind of really where it gets most helpful, right? So you know you can go in by state and look. So you can click on whatever state you're in. California is a good example. And then the ones that are in their database will pop up over here. So, you know, they're all hyperlinked as well. So you can actually go into the annual declarations and stuff like that if you want to get that nerdy.
Oh yeah.
So this is my main go-to resource for public pensions. So
Okay.
that's another distinction you have to draw.
Okay.
You're not going to find anything on corporate pensions in here. This is purely public. And again, this is a sample of the over 5,000 county fund, state, city, and county funds. It is not all of them.
Okay. So that's a good place for us to look. But can we pull up one of them and kind of tell us the numbers that
Sure.
you really focus on?
Oh yeah. Hey, let me go right back there. So the very first one is there's that funded ratio. You see this one where my cursor is hovering, and you can see some various percentages as you're going down this column of California pension funds. And again, some look like they're over 80%, and some look like they're not.
Right.
And you just you go in. Let's pick this one, California teachers, since I think most of you are teachers
Right.
or work in the education system somehow.
Yeah.
So here you go. Like this is just the overall generic information about the fund. You can see how many assets or how much assets they have on hand. So, you know, this looks like 230 billion or so. There you go. You can hover over it, 238 billion. So, you know, some of these funds are huge. Some of them have, you know, upwards of hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars. So here's one of the facts that they display graphically here is the number of actives per annuitant. And they always kind of put the average versus the actual fund. And this is you will see this demographic trend over and over again in any public pension plan that you look at is you have this downward diagonal movement of number of working active workers versus the number of annuitants. And that's just a representation of the baby boom generation and the fact that, you know, U.S. society as a whole is getting older on average, and therefore there are less workers in the system contributing to pension plans, much like Social Security. Costs, so this tells you how much they've paid each year. So what you want on this one is you want to see blue, because blue means a pension fund is paying everything that they're supposed to pay into the system each year. That is not always the case. As you see for this pension fund, they only made blue since the Great Recession. It looks like they've only made blue all the way up last year. And so the red, what the red is, you know, each year pension funds can choose to pay all their contributions in or not. So many state, funds, this all depends on kind of the level of taxes that are coming in each year. And the stuff that isn't paid is rolled into this an actuarial accrual of future payments required to kind of come whole on your debt obligations to pay into this pension. So, the red essentially is bad, all blue is good. And again, depending on the pension system, you would want to see all blue across these. So obviously this one we picked for California teachers is not doing so well with making all its pension obligations. And then here's your funded ratio for the pension itself. You can see kind of right up till the Great Recession there. It's doing okay around the 80% level. Now it's gone way down. And then again, another trend you will see throughout the decade following the Great Recession is a lot of public pension funds, their funding levels just slid sideways for 10 years. So they never kind of caught back up to that ground that they had prior to the Great Recession. And then if you really want to, you can nerd out on kind of all the investments they have and, see kind of where they stack out, their annual returns on their investments. So, pension funds take money in two ways mainly. One is contributions. Now, those contributions could come from workers. Those contributions could come if they're if they're a public pension fund, then that comes in from taxes. And then if you're in a corporate pension fund, it would come in from the corporation. The other way that pension funds create money and build up assets is they take that money because they're not paying it all out each year and they invest it. And you can see much like a personal investor would do, is they pick some kind of split between all these different types of investments in order to kind of hedge their bets around and grow the assets over time in order to have more assets on hand when people are going to retire in that 30-year window. The issue is, unlike a personal retirement account where you only start payouts after a certain point, after you're done accumulating, you retire, and then you start spending out of your personal investments. Pension funds are spending money all the time because they have annuitants taking money out every month. So that creates a different kind of calculation than it would for someone accumulating assets for their own retirement, because pension funds don't have the luxury of not withdrawing money in a down year. So they're always withdrawing money out of their investments. Now, another good way of telling if you're in a pension fund that is in a dire situation or not is whether or not their annual contributions, if any of that is being invested, that means they have enough left over from what they pay people each year in order to invest.
Okay. Take us a step back. We talked about 403Bs, 401Ks, IRAs, 457s. How would you compare, contrast the idea of a pension compared to those kind of retirement options?
So the pension options you just mentioned, or the investment options, retirement options you just mentioned, were all defined contributions. So that means whatever system you're in, they're paying you money up front for you to take and invest on your own. And then you're responsible for that money being there at retirement and lasting through retirement. That is a completely different system than the defined benefit pensions, which is, when people say pension these days, that's what they really mean is defined benefits. There are other kinds, but defined benefits are the major kind. And defined benefit means you get the benefit on the back end. So the defined part of the benefit is not what they contribute to you every year for your own investing in retirement. They are taking that money and investing it, and they're going to pay you at the end of your work career in perpetuity. That's why it's called an annuity. So, that is what a pension fund is, as far as it is either the government that you work for, the state that you work for, or the corporation that you work for. It is their responsibility through that pension fund that they have set up to pay retirees what those retirees were promised when they retire. And so that begs the question, hey, how do they determine what I'm going to be paid?
I was just going to go into that to talk about the many equations we can be looking at.
Yeah, so the pension system typically has a formula that it should be well known. It has to be stated somewhere in the paperwork that you signed when you entered into that job. And what that formula is typically is some kind of combination of your highest paid years and average of it. So for instance, 3 or 5 year of your highest paid years are averaged. And then some kind of multiplier, a percentage multiplier that says, okay, we're going to pay you 50%, or we're going to pay you 40%, or we're going to pay you 30% of your highest 3 years average. That is the most popular method for determining how much a retiree is going to get paid. There are other methods, but again, this one's the most popular. So, you know, you can figure, therefore you have the ability to figure out how much the company or the state is going to pay you, or the pension fund itself. I'll be specific. The pension fund is going to pay. You can go off and calculate that yourself based off of your knowledge of what you've been paid, as well as how long you think you're going to work.
Okay, so let's say we go through our equation and we look at, okay, I'm going to be paid $1,400 a month when I retire. A lot of people are asking, how do I factor that into how much do I actually need to save to retire? Because a lot of people are looking at retiring before, you know, their age factor comes into play with a pension. So how do they factor all this together for their number?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'll start by saying that every pension fund is different. So I'm talking generalities here. So some pension funds start paying out immediately, and some pension funds wait to pay out at a certain age or under certain circumstances. The public pension funds tend to be age related, but it could also be number of work years related. So if you worked longer and fully vested in the pension, it may start paying out immediately. So 35 years seems to be, you know, a fairly popular figure that pension funds use. And after which, if you work the whole 35 years, more than likely you're going to get paid out immediately. But that is generality. So the first thing you need to do is research what your pension fund says the rules are as far as when the payments start. The second thing you need to do, again, is figure out how much they're going to be paying you. The third thing you're probably going to need to figure out is whether or not you take a pension lump sum or you're going to actually take the annuity. Many pension funds, but not all, it's not mandatory, but many pension funds offer a lump sum in lieu of an annuity, or a lump sum that decreases your annuity. So maybe you take half of what is owed to you as a lump sum, and then you annuitize the rest. It all depends, again, on the pension system. But the pension lump sum offer is a big deal because you can't undo it once you've done it. And what you need to understand from the lump sum offer perspective is that that is a transfer of risk back to the retiree of running out of money in their retirement. So if a retiree takes 100% lump sum of what they're owed, then it's on them in retirement to make sure that money lasts. And the thing is, you're not going to get you're not going to get a number for your lump sum that comes close to what you would be paid, assuming you lived a certain amount of time in retirement. So let's say you retire at 55, you think you're going to live till 85. That lump sum is not going to equal 30 years of payments into your pocket. They reduce that number because they assume you're going to take that money and invest it yourself. And you're going to earn returns as good as the pension fund, which is really hard to do. And there you go. So the third issue is you need to decide whether or not you're going to take a lump sum if it's on offer. If it's not, then you don't have to.
Okay.
And then finally, once the money starts coming in, you need to figure out what it's going to cover as far as your expenses in retirement. So the only way you're really going to know that is if you've gone ahead and estimated a budget for yourself in retirement, and you already kind of know what your expenditures are going to be. So you line up all that fixed income. Let's say you got this column here of what your expenses are going to be in retirement, and your fixed income, like your annuity, is only going to pay for half of it. then you're on the hook for this other half right here through investments, through 401ks or 403bs, or just savings in order to make up the rest. And then there is the other issue of taxes as well. Some pensions are taxed in the states that offer them. Sometimes they're not. Federal pensions are always most pensions are always taxed at the federal level, save some exemptions for disability. But some states don't have income tax. So depending on where you live, you're going to need to figure out what your annuity's tax situation is.
Okay. Oh, that's a great overview. So it does sound like it's so dependent on the individual pension to figure out exactly how that's going to all pay out and how you're going to have to figure your own investments. So that'll be homework for all of us to get out our pension notes and really get to know them.
Yeah, so I call this gap here, right? Now I call this your gap number. So if you see me refer to it on the blog, it's the gap number. That's what I'm talking about.
Okay. Now, also, I want to ask you guys, if you have questions coming to your mind as we're going, feel free to put them in the chat box. So we'll kind of come back to that too. Right now, I'm just kind of going through what I had ahead of time from you guys. So that kind of goes into how much do I need to save for retirement. So we're looking at exactly, it sounds like figuring out your budget, figuring out, say you figure out for your expenses, I can live on so much a month. It equates to maybe 40,000 a year. And if I'm getting 1,400, is that what we said, from pensions, you can kind of take that off.
1,400. Yep.
And then figure it all out. And I know a lot of people in like the fire community and in the Choose FI group are looking at how to increase that to like multiply it times 25 to kind of know how you can live off that in forever. So you can leave it to everybody else. You're just living off kind of the interest.
The safe
way,
withdrawal
right?
rate.
Right.
Yes, it's called the safe withdrawal rate.
But let's say somebody's looking at this and they're 55 years old and they're like, okay, I need to know what my number is so I can get by in retirement. I need to not necessarily let it live on forever, but I need to be able to get by. How would you say, kind of factoring that in, and how would you look at that?
So I've been a money tracker all my adult life. So we don't track every penny anymore, but there was a time when we went to that level. So my biggest piece of advice there is you got to start tracking what you spend each year to know how much you're going to be spending in retirement. Some retirement planners or some wealth advisors or investment advisors will, say, hey, you're going to spend, on average, you're going to spend 75% of what you make in your working years. I don't put much credit in that system because it doesn't actually address how much you have spent throughout your life. By far, the better indicator of how much you're going to need in retirement is how much you've been spending throughout your adult working life. So that's one of the ways you're going to need to figure out how much you need for that gap number, or how much you need to have built up on your own, is to say, hey, okay, so this is my estimated retirement budget. My pension's going to create this floor for annuity coming in every year that I'm not going to fall below, or me and my family are not going to fall below. But somehow it's up to me to make up the difference for the rest of the annual retirement budget through savings, through investing, through other cash income flows, like, if you're a landlord and you're getting rent payments. So that type of thing. Having fixed income that cuts off 50% or cuts off 75% of what you otherwise would have to have saved and invested is a huge benefit. Most workers these days do not get that benefit. So it does make saving for retirement easier, but there are also some unique considerations as a potential retiree with a pension that you need to be aware of during your working years in order to take best advantage of the U.S. tax system as it exists right now.
We were talking a little bit yesterday about the 403Bs, the 457s, that put us in a unique position that we could legally hide money, from the tax system and be able to kind of save that. And I have heard a lot of teachers talk about if when they want to retire early, they don't formally retire. At least I've heard people in New York say they don't formally retire with the system. and they let it go to their age factor, and then they live on what they had put in their 457. So that's kind of a nice little cheat that we have that a lot of industries don't have that option, because once you leave a school district, you do have access to that 457. So
Yeah,
that's another
right.
kind of cool bonus that a lot of us have. But obviously, you got to look into that and maybe talk with an advisor, because this is all hearsay.
Yeah, yeah.
um,
So, Millionaire Educator also writes a
yes.
lot on that topic as well.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
whenever anybody in my pension Facebook group, asks kind of a 403B or 457 question, I just refer them to that page.
Yep. And I do have him lined up. So next month he's willing to talk to us. And I'm interested if
Very
you
cool.
guys want to, in the chat box, if you can let me know if you'd be interested in that being a live event like this, or you just want to come back and look at a YouTube video later. I'll try to accommodate that, because I know it's hard for a lot of people to get on live. But
Yeah,
another.
so, just real quick, what you said about some people choosing not to formally retire. So
Hmm.
what they're getting around is the early retirement penalties that most
Hmm.
pension systems have. Because if you think about it, pensions create an incentive to stay right up until the point where you're fully vested in that pension. And from that point forward, mathematically, it makes the most sense to retire and start drawing that annuity right away. Even if you go and get another job, you'll have two incomes, right?
Hmm.
So economists kind of figured this out in the 60s and the 70s of like, hey, we got all these people who are retiring like right at this age, because that's the age where the pension pays out, but that we need more workers in the workforce beyond that age.
Hmm.
So a lot of pension systems started adding in early retirement penalties, meaning you'll get, your formula, you do your formula, but then they'll reduce it for the number of years you're retiring before their official retirement age, which is like if it's 65 and you retire at 60, you're going to get reduced a certain percentage each year for those 5 years.
Right. So yeah, so that does allow you to kind of wait it out and live on other funds, getting a job outside of a school system, outside of other pensions,
Yep.
um, just waiting it out until you can get to that point where you'll be fully vested. Um, so that brings me to kind of another question about vesting and tying it together with moving, because there were a few people that said like, okay, I've lived in California and worked in the California teaching system for 7 years, and I'm going to move to Illinois. What does that mean for my old pension? What does that mean if I go into a new pension system? How does that work?
So again, that's a pension by pension answer.
Hmm.
I did see that question in the Survey Monkey survey, I
Hmm.
think, that you sent around.
Hmm.
The good news is most pension systems allow buying back years if you worked in another pension system. So it's not the same as transferring. What
Hmm.
they're essentially doing is they're saying, okay, hey, for $10,000 for the 10 years you worked in this neighboring state's pension plan, you can buy those years back in our pension plan. That takes money out of your pocket initially, but on the back end, you're going to get a higher annuity, because instead of working 15 years in the new state and having a pension that only pays you for 15 years, if you bought 10 extra years, then they're going to pay you for 25 years. And their actuaries in the pension plans, go and crunch the numbers on what's best, what the best amount is to charge a person coming in from a different pension system in order to buy back those years.
Hmm.
Um, Now, some states or pension systems, neighboring pension systems, might even have agreements that pretty much treat it as the same, like whereas the old pension system would transfer over some amount of money to the new pension system, but that is far more rare than it just kind of being to the individual worker to buy those years back.
Okay.
Military service is another. If you come from the military and then end up once you get out of the military, going into, like, let's say you go be a teacher in a state somewhere. Normally, those pension funds will have some provision for those former military members to buy back their years for that military service.
Great. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again and show them your post on the pension series part 2, worth versus worth it. Would you go into that a little bit about how you factor in, like, do I want to retire? Do I not? How do I start thinking about this?
Sure. Yeah. So the worth it versus worth it story, this is the same story that I put in the book, is a story I tell to kind of just educate people on this idea of something having a hard number value on one side of the scales versus all these kind of more subjective issues that would be going on in your life. The story I tell is about an extremist linked drug trafficking operation that a team of mine and I disrupted in when was it? In 2009. And I got in this situation where the drug runners, so these weren't even the guys who owned the drugs, they was just the guys that were hired to move them. We had them kind of detained, but they set the drugs on fire before we could exploit all the drugs and get them. And one of my guys I thought was in this burning structure where the drugs were going up in. And I was about to charge in through the door to get him back, and I most certainly would have succumbed to smoke inhalation based on the blaze. But right before I was about to enter into this smoky building, I hear him shouting from a rally point we had established before the mission started. And so luckily I didn't have to go in there. Now, my calculation at the time, and I only figured this out in hindsight, was, were the drugs worth me dying? No. The $5 million or the $10 million that those drugs represented into a drug dealer or the terrorists' hands who were moving those drugs was probably not going to be that huge of an impact versus me dying, which would have an obviously much larger impact on me and my family. But the fact that one of my guys was, I thought, on the inside, it was definitely worth it to go into there subjectively. So I use that story to talk about, when you're working in a pension system, inevitably you're going to have this moment where you have to decide, is this pension worth it? I'd love to say that, hey, maybe you don't. Maybe some people are so fulfilled by the pensionable job that they're working in that they never come across this moment. But typically that's not how it happens. Typically at some moment, and it's different for everybody, they're going to have this moment where they decide, I'm staying for this pension or not. So what I am trying to do with the pension series and with the information I'm giving the readers is a way for them to calculate both the hard number value on one hand of what that pension would be worth. So we'll call it objective, even though it has some subjective assessments you have to make to come up with a number. So call it a rough order of magnitude. Come up with a rough order of magnitude of a hard value that this pension is going to have on one hand, versus whatever other issues you got going on in your life, be that job dissatisfaction, health issues, family issues. There's a whole slew of things that could come in over a person's working career that might make them rethink the idea that staying in a pension system for 20, 25 years, 30 years, 35 years, in order to just get that annuity in the end,
Mm-hmm.
is it worth it? So that's the subjective side. The worth it part's the subjective side. The worth part is the objective side. So that is what this story is meant to kind of articulate, in as much as, it's going to be a different answer for everybody. So I'm trying to arm people with the tools that they need to decide whether or not they're staying. And of course, the older you get as a worker, the less and less likely it is that you're going to leave that pensionable job for something new and different.
Mm-hmm.
But there are careers like, the U.S. military has an attrition rate of people getting out of the military before they vest in that 20 years, that pension, of over 80%. So, people are getting out at various timelines along the way, whether they're getting out voluntarily or whether or not they're being mandatory separated because they don't continue to promote. There are many pension systems where stuff like that is occurring as well. So it's not just the military that has a high attrition rate like that.
Yeah, and I do know in our group on Facebook, a lot of the SLPs in schools this year in particular with COVID and not feeling the support of the districts and the administration and the states and all kinds of things. There, it does seem to be a larger number of teachers, speech therapists, physical therapists, everybody that's like, is this worth it to me at this point? If they're getting really close to retirement anyways, a lot of people are saying it's just not. It is just not right now to worry about all of that. So it's a really good conversation for us to kind of think about too, and kind of point each other to you into that discussion, because it's really helpful to look through your eyes, and you've been through so much to kind of really put this equation together, and I appreciate you doing that for all of us.
Yeah, it's been my pleasure. So I would say, not only the COVID thing going on, but just, the modern workforce in general.
Mm-hmm.
The knowledge economy, the digital economy is not particularly well suited for jobs that people work in for 25, 35 years
Mm-hmm.
and retire from. That is an older model of employment.
Mm-hmm.
So the pensions, you really need to look at them. They are meant to entice people, to incentivize people to stay for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that reason may be because they're not going to be getting as paid as much as someone going into a private sector job would be getting paid. It may be because they require that expertise, and it takes a lot to train up and become that person in that pensionable job. And therefore, you don't want to lose those people to, again, probably getting paid higher on the outside. Um, so, you need to view a pension, especially if you're in your younger years. That is what a pension is meant to do. It is meant to incentivize people to stay for a long time. And, it could be against the better advice of their medical professionals or their family or any number of things. And that tends to weigh heavier and heavier the further you get into your work career, um, because, you have other things going on in your life.
Mm-hmm. Um, can I switch back a little bit and talk about how did your book come to be? How did you get going with writing all these chapters? I noticed a lot of them, if not all of them, are actually through your blog. You have a lot of that posted. And then how did you get it actually printed into book format? What was the journey there?
So after I started the blog, which I never expected to do, and kind of based on the initial response I got was, a small but dedicated readership saying, "Hey, you are stating things in your writing I have been thinking for years, but never kind of formalized into words and put down on paper." Um, but a lot of people, not a lot, but several people said, "Hey, it'd be nice if all this information was in one spot." Um,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to hunting and pecking through your blog for the articles that mean something to me. So about a year after I started the blog, I kind of set it as a mental goal to write a book based off my blog posts. I didn't think it would be that hard, and I always knew kind of, hey, the first book should always be about the decision to stay or go, because from that decision everything else flows, especially if you decide to stay. So I started doing that, and by the spring of 2019, so by March, April timeframe of 2019, I had a complete copy of what I thought was a book that I was either going to e-publish or try and work through a publisher. I know several, financial independence bloggers in the community. They've helped me get going and get started. One of them, Doug Nordman, who is the original military-based financial independence blogger, referred me to MK Williams, who she's an author. She is also an editor. She'll help you with your book idea. She does kind of all that thing. And she was just getting started with Choose FI, setting up a publishing arm for Choose FI, which is a very popular financial independence podcast.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at their Facebook group, they have like over 80,000 members and all that stuff. I had been interviewed by those guys previously because I'm the only one who talks about pensions in the financial independence community on a regular basis. So whenever they have pension questions, they typically come my way. It was just a natural fit. I didn't know they were starting a publishing arm at the time, but I got lucky and got in on kind of the ground floor. I think my book was only number 3 or 4 on their published list of books. And the only thing I would say is, from that point in, like, let's call it the summer of 2019, then it took it took 12 more months to actually get the book published. So, that's how many edits I had to go back and make. I had to fix some mistakes that were blatant to really math strong people versus me, who I'm not particularly math strong. So that becomes another caveat. Like, everything I'm telling you here today is kind of my opinion. I am not a
Right, right,
certified
right.
anything. I'm just a guy who's researched a lot on pensions and have one myself. But we got through it in the end and ended up getting published. And, they wanted to publish it, hardbook or hardcover, softcover, electronic, and we are still working on the audiobook. So they're doing the whole thing. They took all the risks
Right.
right up front, so I'm very grateful that they did that, because otherwise my book would have been just e-published, and I would have been working all this out myself, doing word of mouth type stuff.
Hmm. Well, it's great. I've had such a great time reading it, and I'm just surprised, like I said, thinking I'm picking up a book on pensions and like, how am I going to get through it? But it's really, you've done such a great job, like bringing us to where you were in the thought process and what experiences you had. I wanted to read a quote real quick, just because it's just real, when we're thinking about some of these jobs, and your job definitely had a different level of stuck to it, because I'm going to use your quote here. This says, a lot of pension earning jobs suck or have long periods that suck. They will impact you for the rest of your life. That's why our employers dangle a pension at the end of it to make us stay despite the suck. And I just think it's a real informal way to let us know we're kind of in it together, and to look at, the good times with the bad, and know, you're the worth versus worth it. So I appreciate all of that. Can you tell us some of your favorite resources? I know you're very active in the Choose FI group. You have your own Facebook group that you're obviously very active in. What are some of your other resources that you kind of go to and appreciate?
So, if you're talking about books or podcasts, I got quite a few. If you have not read A Simple Path to Wealth by J.L. Collins, you need to. Millionaire Next Door is one of the books that actually started me on my financial independence journey as well. So that one is definitely worth reading, especially if you have kids. Um, from a money tracking perspective, I was a longtime user of Microsoft Money and only reluctantly switched over to Quicken when Microsoft Money shut down. I have really, even though my wife uses Mint right now to track, her part of the finances, I am really stuck with Quicken because I've not found anything better. And the reason why I talk about money trackers so much is because that's how important I consider it to be, as far as helping you to achieve whatever financial goals you have. You got to know where your money's going. You got to know what you spend it on, that type of thing. Podcasts, obviously we mentioned Choose FI, but there are many, many others. One of the ones I like a lot is Jill on Money. So that's Jill Schlesinger. She writes and works for CBS, but she has a long-time radio show and podcast. So if you're just like looking at a way to try and dip your toe in, you know, um, subject by subject into personal finance, if you don't have a lot of experience, her podcast / radio show is a great way to do that. The Money Guy is also another great podcast that does that as well. And then for retirement calculators, which is you will see, like on my blog, I have a whole section on planning. I am a huge planner. It's just my military background, and that's just the type of person I am as well. And so if you want to learn how to write a plan for retirement and then kind of run that plan through simulations, I show you how to do that on my blog. The main retirement calculator I refer to as I'm running my calculations is something called Flexible Retirement Planner, FRP. And it is completely free. You can download it for free. I think there's a paid version if you want to upgun, but I've only ever used the free version. And I use that for all my retirement calculations to know if I was going to be able to afford to retire, especially at the 20-year mark, since prior to my breakdown, I was planning to stay in somewhere longer than 20 years.
Wow. Can you tell everybody where you are right now?
Yeah, we can talk.
Yeah.
So I moved
Okay.
to New Zealand with the family
Awesome.
at the end of January.
Hmm.
So my family and I had gotten used to moving around with our military career. We've been based overseas multiple times, both coasts of the United States. So moving every 2 or 3 years was something we did quite regularly. We were last stationed in Hawaii, and from Hawaii, my wife and I took a trip over to New Zealand. It had always been on our bucket list to do so. Loved the country so much that we started seriously entertaining the idea of retiring here. And I'll use retirement in air quotes. The first thing I did was went and kind of ran the numbers on cost of living differences between where we were planning to retire versus, New Zealand. Found out that actually it was cheaper to come to New Zealand because we were looking at Southern California otherwise. And then started the immigration process. And by far, that was the hardest issue. Not, making the calculations was easy in comparison to navigating the New Zealand immigration system. And so the ultimate way we decided to come into the country legally was to me to use the GI Bill, go back to school in New Zealand, and the GI Bill will pay for overseas schools. And I'm doing a master's program now. We live on the South Island of New Zealand in a town called Nelson on the very north end of the South Island. So we have the entire South Island and the Southern Alps as our playground. And so, yeah, we live here with our 2 young children, and just trying to make a go of it over here as opposed to, just retiring in the U.S. somewhere.
Awesome. Well, what would you tell yourself 20 years ago that would have
Yep.
helped you? And then what do you hope to be telling yourself in 20 years?
So there are multiple things I might be telling myself in 20 years. I think the big one is maybe that it will turn out that we oversaved, for one. So my wife and I have always been rather frugal. I think, during some of my highest earning years, we were saving anywhere from 25 to 30% of our annual income. And it turns out that I had so many medical issues that the VA, the Veterans Administration, is actually paying me a whole, another retirement check every month. So I think, my budget predictions for how much we needed to save and stuff like that probably have overshot the mark by quite a bit. Now that's okay because, like the medical or the VA check is really meant for the medical issues that I'm going to incur later in life or encounter later in life, which actually I've already started to encounter. Medical issues was one of the many reasons I decided to retire, physical as well as mental. So I have a number of physical issues going on as well. So I think, I'm going to have to rely heavily on our retirement savings at some point, probably for medical stuff, but that won't hopefully be for a while. So I think there's a potential I might be saying in 30 years that maybe we oversaved. Now there was no way to, I could calculate how much my pension was going to pay per year, but there's no way to calculate the VA in advance. It's an experience you just have to go through on your own. So, even though I planned for everything, there's just no way I could plan for that. What I would tell myself or what I would think about the next 30 years is, well, I guess, at that point in age, I will be like in my 70s at that point. So I probably would be thinking about, intergenerational wealth at that point, and what we're going to pass on. And so, if you read The Millionaire Next Door, the findings about parents continually giving money to their children and their grandchildren and creating kind of this cycle of dependence is not good. So, from my perspective, I'd be looking to avoid the lessons from that book as far as passing money on down to my children or even grandchildren. So, maybe we do something with the money instead that's more beneficial to kind of the greater humanity as opposed to just our own family.
Interesting. Well, I want to thank you again for taking time to do this. I know it was kind of difficult to get our schedules to align, but I really appreciate that you took time to do this with us. Thank you so much, Grumpus, for taking the time to do this.
You're welcome. Thank you
Round of
for having me. This has been great.
Yes. Like, how can they find you besides the website that we put up there? What's another way that they can find you online? You have a lot going on.
Yeah, so I mentioned it earlier. I run a Facebook group, private Facebook group for pensioners, either people currently receiving a pension or workers in pensionable jobs, or maybe the loved ones if the loved one is more the money person in the family, which happens quite a bit. So you can find me there. It's called Golden Albatross, Golden Handcuffs. You answer 3 questions, I'll let you in, and it is a great resource to crowdsource answers to questions because, like I said earlier, each pension is unique, and therefore we're getting to the point where we have a member that's probably got some situation similar to you, and maybe they're in the same pension system or whatnot. And so it's ended up being a good resource for people joining and connecting with other people and just kind of sharing their thoughts and their lessons learned. So that is definitely something, if you're interested in, you should go and seek out. I'm on Twitter as, Maximus Grumpus. I'm on Instagram as well, although my wife really runs that part for me because I'm too old and crotchety. and then the blog, so the blog is where all the information is stored, and it's all free to the public. I don't even have advertisements or anything. If you're interested and you're kind of thinking about this worth versus worth it, definitely go out and buy the book. I would appreciate that. So would choose FI. But I think based on the fact that I see probably a few more mature faces in this audience, some of the other resources on the blog are probably going to be more applicable, since you're probably already decided that you're staying for the pension. And if that's the case, I would say check out the planning section and the resource section and stuff like that.
All right. Well, thank you so much again. I'll let everybody go. I know I've kept you a little bit long, but thank you so much, everyone. We will talk to you soon.
All right, it's been
Bye-bye.
fun.